Welcome to a special In the Name of the Law, Race in America, with your host Liisa Speaker from Speaker Law Firm and co-host Takura Nyamfukudza from Chartier Nyamfukudza PLLC.
Good morning and welcome back to In the Name of the Law. We are finishing up a trilogy of a series on race in America with our very special friend Takura Nyamfukudza, who is an attorney at Chartier and Nyamfukudza. He has a preeminent criminal defense practice and is here today to introduce our guest. Takura?
Thank you so much, Liisa. I'm going to dive right in. I'm excited about this series, although I'm sad that we've come to an end. I'm really looking forward to the comments from our guest today, though. And of course, my awesome business partner, Mary Chartier. Every time we set foot inside the courtroom, I'm thankful that she's on the same side of the aisle as I am, and I'm not jousting against her. We are also fortunate enough to be joined by Dr. Merritt Norvell. He is the former director of athletics at Michigan State University, so hopefully once things open back up, he can get me some great, tickets. Also, he's a former head coach of the Madison Mustangs semi-professional football team, member of the Mid-State Football League, and they won 2 league championships. So he knows a lot about sports. He is currently, though, the executive vice president, global leader education practice, where they lead worldwide education practice group that provides talent recruitment and executive consultation to the education marketplace. They provide recruitment, professional development, and leadership training to the intercollegiate and professional sports clients. He does a lot. He knows a lot about sports. And certainly not least, we have the senior pastor at the Tabernacle of David Church, Pastor Larry M. Trice Jr. He is the 2019 to 2020 recipient of the Humanitarian Award from the Davis-Dunnings Bar Association. That is an association that means a great deal to me because I was a former president. I joined when I was a student. We will get more into what each of these gentlemen have done in their professional capacities. So I want to dive right into the questions to ensure that we can get through as many of these as possible. Gentlemen, I'm going to go ladies first. So my first question is for Mary. The Michigan Commission on Law Enforcement Standards, known as MCOLS, is an entity very few people know about, but it impacts citizens in potentially life-altering ways. Would you please explain what MCOLS does and let us know whether it should be overseen by people who are not law enforcement personnel?
So MCOLS deals with statewide standards on training and employment, qualifications and funding for law enforcement. It's a really important organization and has a lot to do with policing in our state. Your question is an interesting one about whether it should be run by citizens. And I think the answer is probably no, right? I don't think that citizens have the education, the experience, the knowledge to tell police how to police. But I think that citizens should play a bigger role on the commission. And I think the commission should be broadened or individuals brought in terms of the number who have experience with policing as community leaders and can talk about the impact on policing in communities and can also offer some innovative solutions. I think citizens and community leaders need to be partnered up with law enforcement to make the commission more innovative, more relevant, more progressive, more proactive in our state. And that's actually the way I think we should be looking at all of these issues, taking the police and other experts, other individuals with a lot of knowledge, combining them with community leaders, and that way we get the best result for our communities. We're bringing all voices in, we're bringing all kinds of great intellect and brains in, and then we come up with really relevant, pivotal solutions for our citizens.
Thank you for that. My next question is for Dr. Norvell. Muhammad Ali was drafted, refused to answer to his name or take the oath at the induction, and was ultimately convicted for the same. Colin Kaepernick refused to stand for the national anthem and instead took a knee. Dwight Howard recently said, and I quote, "Basketball or entertainment, period, isn't needed at this moment and will only be a distraction. Given your experience as one of very few African-American directors of athletics at a Big Ten school, do you think athletes should just stay in their respective lanes and say just box, dribble, or whatever other sport they are paid to play?
Well, let me just clarify a couple of things first. I spent 8 years as the Assistant Vice Chancellor of Student Affairs at the University of Wisconsin, and also Assistant Dean of the Graduate School, plus 15 years as an IBM executive. So you only got the coaching part of it. So, and let me begin by answering this question by saying that I remember the 60s and the 70s when Jesse Jackson came in and told black students to strike. That was followed by the white students in the Vietnam War strike, okay? So what you see today, and this is where it comes in with the athletes, the kids that are protesting today, the white kids in particular and black kids, are 2 generations removed from those who started. So there's a different conversation they hear around the table when they're talking. They've never had an opportunity to participate in a strike until they stayed at home and watched the man get killed on television. And that was their friends. That was a kid they sat in school together. That was a kid they played together. That was a team they played football together with. And so you have a greater relationship between this younger generation than you did before. And that's kind of where we are today. And that's what's different about what happened back in the early 60s and 70s and what you see today. Now, how does that relate to athletics? Well, we've got the most informed generation we've ever had. And, and it's all because of this little thing right here. Kids used to ask their parents about questions. They don't ask them anymore. They just go to Google. That's the way they tell time. Right? What happens now is you'll see all these videos being made by teams talking about we're together. I love my brothers. Black lives matter. Sports is the most homogeneous way to bring together all people of all races, of all genders, of all political beliefs. And the question is, what happens when the game's over, right? We go back to what's known as systemic racism, which most people don't understand, but they live in a society which is dictated by race, politics, and economics. And it creates a hierarchy of those who have and those who don't have. And that's what these kids need to understand. And what's happening now, I happen to have a son who's a head football coach, and they're giving their kids off on election day. They're also taking a day off to register to make sure all those kids are registered to vote. Okay? So that's what's happening now, and that's how sports becomes a very important part of what's going on in society today. I used to tell my staff at the university, we're the drug of choice, okay, for the masses. And when they like us, they love us. When we're good, they love us. When we're bad, they hate us. But when you take away fan participation in these 60, 70, 100,000 seat stadiums today, that's got to be filled by something else. And if it's not, then people are going to get diverted because it's like going to church for a lot of people, okay? They go to get their fix. And that's the role that sports plays. Now, is it right, wrong? Don't know, but that's the way it is. And these kids today can't be coached the way I was coached. Coach said, do this, you did it. Today, these kids ask why. All right? And you got to have an answer for them. You can't stand up and say, when the kids came back in a group, they wanted to do something about the movement. It wasn't about football. It was about what can we do as athletes to contribute to the movement. That pulled all the universities, all the coaches into it. Now, you're going to see a lot of coaches, probably some head coaches leave this business because they can't handle it. They're uncomfortable with the issue of race. But I think people have to continue to talk. People have to continue to keep their minds open, and people need to connect. So the dialogue is about, what is it? I don't understand it. You know, a lot of my black friends are frustrated right now because they're getting a bajillion calls from white folks saying, I don't understand. Teach me, okay? But you have to dialogue with them, because if they reach out, you got to reach back. And they're reaching out because their children and their grandchildren have reached out and have said, what are you going to do about it? And so once the marching is over with, then I believe that older people like me that have been through these rodeos 3 or 4 times, you know, and have been involved constantly in trying to make America better in sports and in real life for racial minorities and oppressed people, we have to be able to tell these young people, these are the things that you have to do to bring about real change. You march to get attention. But real change comes about when you understand that the laws and the policies that affect your daily life start at the local city council, start at the state legislator, start at the governor, starts with the mayor, starts with the police chief. That's where change begins to come, because the oligarchy in this country has taken over all of those positions, and they've set policy to help them, and the police department and the legal system and the economic system is all geared to save them and to serve them. And if you don't like it, then you need to get involved to make that difference. And the first place you got to go is to the ballot box. You got to know who your local representative is. You got to know who your state legislature is. You got to register to vote. And I think that coaches, whether they like it or not, athletic departments, whether they like it or not, have now been pulled into that arena. And that's why you see coaches giving canceling practice for the day so people will go vote. That's why you see them making sure that kids get registered to vote. And it's going to make a difference.
I love that. That was fantastic. I wish you were running. I'd go vote for you. I want to vote for you right now.
Dr. Norvell, thank you for that. And actually, I've received a few of those same phone calls. But what's clear after your commentary is that whether it's football or basketball, it's not just a game anymore. And actually, that part of your comments were a nice segue to my question for Pastor Trice. Now, Martin Luther King Jr., Jesse Jackson, and Al Sharpton are just a few of the men of faith whose names are synonymous with the civil rights movement that people most often associate with the 1950s and 60s. It still continues today, though. Do you think that there is a continuing role for men of faith in the quest for justice, equity, and putting an end to all the isms that are too numerous to list here today? And if so, what is that role?
Well, thank you. I think what's important is, first of all, the answer to that is yes. And I too had an opportunity to travel with Jesse Jackson and have an opportunity firsthand to begin to see, that we not only had in the church a group of Pentecostal pastor, and so our goal has always been about the spiritualness of people and their lives and going to heaven and preparing people for heaven. And really, I didn't grow up in a home where we really, though we dealt with a lot of the social ills, in the early 70s, late 60s, still, that was not something we were kind of shielded from that in the church. But as I began to grow up and begin to see, many of the social injustices that was going on, and spending time with Jesse Jackson, we began to see that there is something that we have to be more concerned about, more than just the spiritual man, but also the physical man and the emotional man. And the reason why we go to church, the doctor said, for a fix, but really it's our faith and what we believe to strengthen our faith and what we share. John the Baptist, I think when you go into the New Testament, you'll find that most of the New Testament, especially the Gospels, were written about social justice and inequities that were going on during that time. And as these things begin to happen as pastors, you can't be a minority pastor and not go to the jails and not go to the prisons and not go to the homes and not. I mean, we firsthand had to deal with these things, and unfortunately, at first we had to deal with them, talk to the judges, and we have to try to explain. The judges wouldn't believe it, the police wouldn't believe it, the chief wouldn't believe it. But now we have, videos. Now we have things that we can show. And it does make a big difference when you're going in now talking and sharing, with those in the criminal justice system that, things have to change. You're seeing it, up in front of your face. And I think that for me, when looking at John the Baptist, there are many who came to him and say, what can we do, to change our life? And John the Baptist said, well, first of all, you have to make sure that if you're hungry, if someone's hungry, you need to give them your food. If someone's naked, you need to give them your cloak. He talked to the police officer or the judges of that day and say, listen, do no violence to anyone. I think throughout the Bible, throughout faith has taught us. I mean, it's not just literally just for the church, but it's for the morality, I think, that we've walked away from, that people should take care of each other. And I think we have a responsibility as pastors to speak that and share that. And I've been doing that. I went out for the first time. I know during the LA riots, I didn't protest. I went to some different meetings, but this time it was just moved upon me to protest and to go out and share my voice. And I just believe I'm on my knees there. I had joined with those, in history, the Martin Luther Kings and the Jesse Jackson and Al Sharptons and many more who are doing such a wonderful job. We've got to do this together. And I think in the church, we have to cry loud. We have to speak it. I know we're going to speak about heaven, but we got to live here on this earth. And we've got to shine a light on what is not right. Some people don't know because of the systemic injustices and racism. They don't know that they're actually being, treated wrong. They don't even recognize. I was talking to a young lady on yesterday, and she was sharing about the young man that got shot in the back. And she called me up. She said, Pastor, what was wrong with him getting shot in the back? He turned around and he had a stun going on. What was wrong with that? And I said, well, sweetheart, it's justice has always sometimes in people's mind has been about revenge and about getting back. But justice is about just fairness and equity. It's just not fair that Black men who long back when I grew up used to have a gun for the police to be able to shoot you. Was he armed? But these days you don't have to have anything to get killed. And I just began to share with her how unfair things are and how unfair things have been as it relates to especially minority men, African American men, and how with a man with something that was not going to kill the other police officer, here he was shot 2 times in the back. And when she began to see it, she said, wow, I never saw that. Here she is, a Black woman. She grew in the 60s like me, but she never even recognized that there was racism, systemic racism that has happened. I'm saying it happens, to the poor. It happens it's just happening, and we're just seeing it, and we're just now we're opening our eyes to it even more and sharing it even more and shining a light on. And I think that that's what pastors really have to do to our congregations, because some of our congregations are those who don't even know. They're coming from broken homes, broken families. They're not educated, and someone has to open their mouths up and say, "Listen here, this is not right. You should not be treated this way." There's a lot of prejudice that is going on, and a lot of now young people in the church, even though they can't come, they're calling me up and saying, Pastor, this is going on. Pastor, this is going on. I'm like, wow. And so now it's opening, now I'm making calls, and now I'm doing things. Instead of doing a whole lot of spiritual praying as it relates to a lot of things I was doing, now I find myself I always told people, I said, I'm not a politician, I'm a pastor, but I'm kind of feeling like these days, I feel a lot more political as it relates to the situations that have arisen today. So yes, I believe that every pastor, we all have a responsibility, because there are churches and ministries that are out there that are actually, prompting up this racism, and they're not speaking against it, and they're closing their mouths to what is happening.
You know, it's been said that men who do things that count don't stop to count them. And thank you for being one that so many people can count on to shed light.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Mary, in the 1960s, President Lyndon Johnson created the President's Commission on Law Enforcement on Administration and Justice, which issued its final report in 1967. We had the NAP Commission. In 1994, the Violent Crime Control in Law Enforcement Act authorized the Department of Justice to bring civil suits against local law enforcement agencies. The early 2000s brought much talk about de-escalation training and a heavy focus on community policing. A lot of these same concepts are being discussed today. Haven't we seen this movie already?
We have. It's like a sequel, you know, that just keeps getting made and made and made. But it's important, right? Just because we've had this conversation before and we haven't seen the systemic changes that we certainly would hope, it doesn't mean that we stop having the conversation. I think both of your guests are amazing today and spoke about how this generation is different. This generation is more united. This generation is more vocal. I think this generation they value themselves in a way where they're willing to say and demand what they deserve. Right? They're not hesitant. They're not asking for change. They're really demanding it. And I think that even though we've gone through this before and we certainly hoped, again, there would be changes, now we really have a generation that is uniting. And I think that this younger generation is uniting with folks of my generation, a generation older, a generation younger. I mean, they're really pulling everyone together. They're incredibly energetic. They're incredibly vibrant. They know their value. And one of the things I think the pastor can probably speak to this more than anything, but hope is really something that unites all of us. Hope is that no matter what our difference is, hope keeps each and every one of us going when we get up in the morning, right? That's how we get out of bed. That's how we keep putting one foot, in front of the other. I mean, we had that, the story of Ladura Watkins Takura on our podcast. He spent over 40 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. We've exonerated men who have been in prison for decades and they didn't commit the crime. And I'm always amazed at, don't you just give up? And every one of them has said hope is what gets them through. They knew someday they would be exonerated. We have to know and believe that we are making positive changes for us, but also for the people to come. So, hey, we've heard it all before, great, but we're still going to keep putting one foot in front of the other, keep forging ahead. We're making the changes. We're demanding the changes. And I think your guests today have been so incredible and inspiring. And if they don't get people out voting and making positive changes in their community, then nobody could.
Thank you. And actually, I got to meet Mr. Watkins in the flesh, and the whole time he had a smile on his face. I know when I've been put on timeout for 5 minutes, I got upset. But for him to spend actually more time behind bars than I've been alive and still to be as gracious as he was is something else. And, anyway, I have a lot more questions, right, that I'm going to get to ask. But with the little bit of time that we have left, Liisa, I'd like to ask you, in light of all the discussions that we've had from the first episode, the second, and the comments that Dr. Norvell and Pastor Trice have given, what has been the biggest takeaway for you, and what do you think it means to be a good ally?
So, the biggest takeaway, really, to be a good ally, there's a couple things. As an attorney, I think we have a special role in society, and attorneys should be getting out there and helping rewrite legislation. And we can do that through a variety of organizations. For example, I'm a member of the Michigan Association for Justice, which is a group that advocates for civil justice. They should be working on rewriting the qualified immunity legislation, because until we get rid of qualified immunity to the way it's done now, police officers are not going to have the incentive to stop doing what they're doing. We've got to get that law changed. Everybody, attorneys and non-attorneys, have to research who is running for office. And do they support the values that we support? Do they support the laws that will make a change and bring reform? And then get out there and vote for those candidates that are going to make a difference. And all of us have to do it.
I know that you've established the LMTS Child Care Center You're responsible for the Carolyn Ramsey Community Feeding Program, and you help oversee the mobile food pantry in conjunction with the city of Lansing when it comes to the Tabernacle of David. So it is beyond doubt that you are a man of action. But I'd also like you to share some inspirational words for what we know will be long and challenging tasks ahead of us. I've heard you give words like that. So if you would take us out in that manner, we'd greatly appreciate it.
Thank you. I'll be real brief. And amen to Sister Mary. You know, hope, the Bible lets us know that hope deferred maketh the heart sick. You wonder why so many people are acting in such terrible ways. I mean, and crying and hurting some, because when they see that there is no hope, they respond in negative ways, and they'll do things that they'll loot, they'll steal, they'll hurt people. And so one of the things that we definitely preach is hope. When we look back over, the histories, the annals of time, we find out from some of the worst tragic circumstances, somebody had to keep believing and hoping, whether it was through the Depression, where social change came, World War II, Pearl Harbor change came, even the death of Emmett Till, his mother, Mamie, showed his body, and things began to change, really galvanize the civil rights movement. All the way through history, we find out that somebody had to keep believing. And I thank God for you all being online today, because every time someone speaks and every time someone shares, I think it gives hope to someone to believe that things can and will turn around. I don't want to preach today, but there was a good man, that went in the grave for 3 days, and everybody thought all was over. And in 3 days, he rose again, and he became the savior of the world. And so I just believe that, when it comes to everyone, faith believers, attorneys, politicians, whomever you are, we can change things if we come together. If we sit down and listen to one another, and just be empathetic to one another's situations and feelings. This is hard. This is hard. From the pandemic to this is hard, because you want to go hug people, but you can't even really do that. And so it's really difficult. It is really difficult, I must say, as a pastor. And but let me let you know, I believe that things are going to turn around. I believe that things are going to get better. We believe, hopefully, that we can get someone in office there that will be able to look at things a lot different and help us to be able to heal this country. This country is hurting. But I believe that those people are, and I believe each and every single one of you have been raised up for this time as Esther was, for such a time as this, and things are about to turn around, and things are going to get better. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I wish we had 6 more episodes with an hour each, but we don't. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time. Liisa, Mary, thank you much. Thank you so much for tuning in, watching and listening to all 3 episodes of this special on race in America. The conversation does not end here, though. Check us out on www.cndefenders.com, where we will continue this conversation with some of our guests on this series and many other great speakers. www.cndefenders.com. Thank you for tuning in.
Thank you for joining us today for In the Name of the Law. Please go to WLAJ.com for more information on today's topics